There's a job in America today that pays a median of $109,000 a year and needs no college degree. The top earners in this trade clear more than $158,000 a year, and almost no one has heard of it. It is not a tech job, it is not finance, and it is not medicine, and you will never see it advertised at a career fair. No child grows up dreaming of this work, no guidance counselor ever mentions it, and no recruiter ever knocks on a high school door for it. It is hidden in plain sight, riding up and down inside every building you enter, and yet the people who keep it running are nearly invisible to you. And yet a fully trained professional in this trade out-earns the average lawyer, the average accountant, and most of the engineers in his city. He out-earns them with no student debt, no 4-year degree, and no unpaid internships, having been paid a real wage from his very first day. The trade is elevator and escalator installation and repair, one of the most invisible and most essential skilled trades in the entire country. According to the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, the median wage for this trade was $109,000 in 2025. That is more than double the median wage for all American workers, which sat at roughly $50,000 in the very same year. The bottom 10% of these workers still earned around $59,000, more than the typical American makes at the middle of the pay scale. The top 10% earned more than $158,000, a figure that rivals doctors, dentists, and senior corporate managers. In states like Maine, Nevada, and California, the median wage for an elevator mechanic climbs past $140,000 a year. To put that in plain terms, the middle of this trade earns what many people consider the dream of a top-tier college degree. And the top earns far more. And here's the part that almost no one knows, the part the schools never tell you, the part hidden in plain sight. There are only about 24,000 of these workers in the entire United States, in a country of more than 300 million people. There are roughly 1.3 million elevators in America, and every single one of them must be inspected, maintained, and repaired by law. The workforce that keeps them running is small, it is aging fast, and it is becoming harder and harder to replace with each passing year. Welcome to Forgotten Trades Vault. Before we open this vault, hit subscribe so the next archive finds its way back to you. The archive opens, as it so often does, more than a century ago. To understand why this trade pays so well today, we have to go back to a single afternoon in New York City in 1853. For most of human history, buildings could only rise as high as people were willing to climb the stairs, which meant about 6 floors at most. The upper floors of a building were the cheap floors, the undesirable floors, reserved for servants, for storage, and for the poorest tenants. Then, a mechanic named Elisha Otis solved the one problem that had kept buildings short for the entire history of human construction. Hoisting platforms already existed, but everyone feared them, because if the lifting rope ever snapped, the platform and its passengers would plunge to the ground. At the New York World's Fair in 1853, Elisha Otis stood on a raised platform high above a watching crowd of curious spectators. He had himself hoisted into the air on an open platform, and then, with a flourish, he ordered an assistant to cut the single rope. The crowd gasped as the platform dropped, but it fell only a few inches before his new safety brake snapped tight and held it firmly in place. Otis turned to the stunned crowd and spoke the words that would change the skyline of every city on Earth. "All is safe, gentlemen." That single safety brake is the reason skyscrapers exist, the reason cities could finally grow upward instead of merely outward across the land. Within a few short years, the Otis Elevator Company was installing its safety elevators in the tallest new buildings rising across American cities. The first passenger elevator was installed in a New York department store in 1857, and the age of the vertical city had truly begun. Suddenly, the top floor became the most valuable floor, the penthouse was born, and the entire economics of urban real estate was turned upside down. Without the safety elevator, there is no skyscraper, no modern downtown, no vertical city, and no possibility of housing millions in a small footprint. The elevator quietly became the most used form of transportation on the planet, carrying far more passengers every single day than every airline combined. The American elevator industry grew alongside the American skyline, and by the 20th century, it had become a respected and well-paid skilled trade. The men who installed and maintained these machines held the safety of thousands of strangers in their hands every single working day of the year. A falling elevator could kill, a jammed door could maim, and a single overlooked component could turn a routine ride into a deadly accident. For that reason, the trade was always tightly controlled, heavily regulated, and protected by one of the strongest labor unions in the country. The International Union of Elevator Constructors guarded the trade, set its high standards, and made certain that its members were paid what the danger was worth. To become an elevator mechanic was to enter a small, proud, and fiercely protected guild that most ordinary Americans never even thought about. It was steady, honest, and highly skilled work, and it carried a quiet dignity that a careful person could build an entire life around. The work itself was never simple, and it grew more complex with every passing decade of the 20th and 21st centuries. A modern elevator is not a simple box on a rope, but a complex system of motors, cables, hydraulics, sensors, and computerized controls. An elevator mechanic must understand electrical systems, mechanical systems, hydraulics, and digital diagnostics, all at the same time and often under real pressure. He reads blueprints, he assembles cars and components, he wires control panels, and he tests every finished installation against strict legal specifications. He troubleshoots failures in brakes, in motors and switches, and in the computerized control systems that run every modern elevator in the country. This is not a desk job, and it is not for everyone, because the work is physical, technical, and sometimes genuinely dangerous. He works in cramped machine rooms inside dark elevator shafts and at significant and frightening heights above the hard floor below. He lifts equipment weighing up to 200 pounds in heat and in cold, surrounded by oily and greasy moving machinery. The injury rate in this trade is higher than the national average because falls, electrical shocks, and muscle strains are constant and real hazards. And precisely because the work is so skilled, so essential, and so genuinely difficult, it is always paid extremely well to those who master it. A building owner cannot simply shut down the elevators in a hospital, a high-rise, or an airport because the entire structure depends on them working. When an elevator fails, the call goes out immediately, and the mechanic who answers it holds real leverage because almost no one else on earth can fix it. That combination of high skill, high stakes, and low supply is the quiet engine that has kept this trade among the best paid in the country for decades. So if this trade pays so well, and if the demand is so high, and if the work is so essential, then one question remains. Why has almost no one heard of it? And why does almost no young American ever consider it as a serious and realistic career path? The answer is the same answer that explains so many of the trades we have opened in this archive across the entire series. It was not hidden by the market, and it was not hidden by any lack of demand, because the demand has never been higher than it is today. It was hidden by a school system that decided, somewhere in the late 20th century, that there was only one respectable path forward in life. That single path ran straight through a 4-year college degree, and every other path was quietly relabeled as a lesser and lower choice. Starting in the 1970s and 80s, American high schools began stripping out the shop classes and the vocational training programs. The guidance counselors were retrained to push every single student toward college, regardless of that student's real talents, interests, or temperament. A teenager who was brilliant with his hands, who could fix anything, who loved machines, was told that his real future lay in a lecture hall. The trades were reframed as a fallback for those who could not cut it academically, rather than as the skilled and lucrative careers they truly were. An entire generation grew up believing that working with your hands was a sign of failure rather than a genuine and respectable path to real wealth. They were taught that the office was the goal, that the desk was the prize, and that anything involving a tool belt was a step down in the world. The irony is brutal because many of those office jobs now pay less, offer less security, and carry far more debt than the trades they replaced. No one told them that an elevator mechanic could out-earn a lawyer because no one in the school building even knew that surprising fact themselves. The counselors did not know, the teachers did not know, and the parents, who had been raised on the same college message, did not know either. And so the trade became invisible not because it disappeared, but because the entire culture simply stopped pointing anyone toward its open door. Meanwhile, the existing workforce kept getting older, and fewer young people arrived to replace the mechanics who were retiring each year. Today, that shortage has become a genuine crisis, and it is the single best opportunity hidden inside this entire forgotten and invisible trade. Roughly 1 in 4 skilled trades workers in America is now over the age of 55, and that entire group is approaching retirement at once. As they retire, they take decades of irreplaceable knowledge with them, and there are nowhere near enough young workers being trained to fill the gap. The Bureau of Labor Statistics projects about 2,000 openings in this trade every single year for the next decade across the country. That may sound small, but remember that the entire workforce is only about 24,000 people in the whole of the United States. That means the trade must replace nearly 1/10 of its entire workforce every year, and there are simply not enough trained workers to do it. When demand is high and supply is low, wages rise, and that simple economic law is exactly why this trade pays what it pays today. So let us talk about how a person actually enters this trade today, because the path is real, it is open, and it is surprisingly direct. You do not need a college degree, you do not need years of expensive schooling, and you do not need to take on a single dollar of debt. The standard path is a registered apprenticeship, run jointly by the elevator industry and the International Union of Elevator Constructors. The program is administered through the National Elevator Industry Educational Program, and it combines classroom learning with paid work in the field. The apprenticeship typically runs 4 to 5 years, with around 600 hours of classroom instruction and roughly 8,000 hours of field work. To even apply, you generally need a high school diploma, a clean ability to pass a basic aptitude test, and the physical capacity to do the work. There is no tuition bill waiting for you, no lecture hall, and no 4 years of unpaid study before you are finally allowed to start earning. Here's the part that changes everything, because unlike a college student, an elevator apprentice is paid a real wage from his very first day. Apprentices usually start at about half of what a fully trained mechanic earns, and they receive steady raises as they advance through the program. That means a young person can start earning around $50,000 while still in training, with zero tuition and zero student debt to carry. By the time a college graduate is finishing a 4-year degree, often buried under tens of thousands of dollars of student loan debt. The elevator apprentice has finished his training, has no debt at all, and is already earning a 6-figure salary in a stable and protected trade. Think carefully about that gap, because it is not a small difference. It is the difference between starting adult life ahead instead of starting it behind. The work is dangerous, the work is hard, and the work is not for everyone who hears about it on a video like this one. But for the right person, the person who is good with his hands and unafraid of heights, it is one of the best deals in America. The states that pay the most are Maine, Nevada, and California, where the median wage climbs past $140,000 a year. The largest number of jobs are concentrated in New York, Florida, and Texas, where tall buildings and dense cities create constant and steady demand. This is not a dying trade like so many others we have opened in this archive, and that is exactly what makes it so remarkable. This is a living trade, a growing trade, and a trade that is desperately searching for the very people who were never told it existed. It cannot be sent overseas because the elevators are here, in our buildings, and they must be fixed by someone standing physically inside them. It cannot be replaced by software because no line of code can climb into a dark shaft and repair a failing brake 40 floors above the street. That is the deep reason this trade survives and thrives while so many office jobs grow shaky, uncertain, and quietly threatened by automation. The skill was not buried by time, and it was not buried by technology, because the demand for it has never once stopped growing. It was buried by a culture that forgot how to value the people who keep the modern world physically running beneath our feet and above our heads. The trades they hid, the wages they buried, the doors they never told you were open. If you are young and choosing a path, or if you know someone who is, this is the kind of door worth walking up to and knocking on yourself. And if you are older and feel it is too late, remember that career changers enter these apprenticeships every single year at every age. If this vault opened a door for you, leave a comment with the trade you want this archive to open next. The vaults will keep opening, and the next high-paying secret is waiting just behind the next door. The next vault opens soon,